So, helping with memory loss. This is me with the croaky voice, Jan Robson. I'm the Provincial Education Coordinator at the Alzheimer's Society of BC and your facilitator today. So what we're going to talk about with helping in the topic, helping with memory loss, we'll look at the effects of memory loss on the person's life. What does it do to them in general? What does it do to them in terms of how they feel? What's happening in the brain? So just a tiny bit about memory loss and the brain. Any of you that participated in the Understanding Dementia teleworkshop, you will have received this information in far more depth. But just to give you at least a taste of why is memory loss happening? What's happening to the brain that's causing it? We'll look at some strategies to help the person with memory loss and a little bit about the use of memory aids. I just want to say that a lot of what we'll be talking about this afternoon, if you sit and look at it afterwards, it's fairly common sense. But recognizing that when you're stressed and upset and you're dealing with someone you care about who has memory loss that is interfering significantly with their life, often those common sense kind of solutions don't present themselves. You're tired, you're stressed. If you're a person with dementia who's listening today, same thing. You're tired, you're stressed, and sometimes some of these basic ideas just don't present themselves. So it's not fancy. What I'm going to be talking about is not fancy. And hopefully is just reinforcing to you, if you've already started to do some of these things, that you know you're on the right track. So the effects of memory loss. Well, first of all, and often the biggest thing for a lot of people, it's embarrassing. You know, they go to a party, they see someone they've known for 30 years, and their name just does not come. And the person comes up to them and says, you know, hi, John, how are you doing? Nice to see you again. How long has it been, buddy? And they're standing there thinking, I don't know this person's name. I'm not even sure that I recognize his face, but certainly the name. And so it's very, very embarrassing for people. And often when that's happening on a regular basis, the person slides into that mindset that says, boy, am I ever getting stupid. You know, you're talking to your stupid mom. You know, you're talking to your stupid husband. And that's their point of view often when they're dealing with the problem of memory loss. It's distressing for the person. The more and more memory loss takes hold, the more and more everything in life is new. You know, they make plans to do something with someone and then they forget them. And so making the plans over and over again. Or they go and see a new park in town. Isn't this a beautiful park? And then they go back, you know, a week later and the person they're with says, yeah, this is the park we were at last week. It's really nice, isn't it? And they're thinking, last week? No, I haven't seen this place before. So everything is new, and that's very distressing for the person. And of course, distressing, embarrassing, you're frustrated. You know, oh, I can't get this to work, that kind of attitude. Why won't my brain do what I want it to do? It's very frustrating for people. And so sometimes what we see in terms of their feelings is that kind of frustration / anger because they're so upset with themselves that their brain isn't doing what it should be doing. And this can be particularly acute for the person who always, you know, had the good brain, the person who could always be relied on to remember the phone number, the person that, you know, all their life people were saying, oh, you know, mind like a steel trap. And if this starts happening to that person, it's particularly difficult. Along with this loss of memory, ultimately, gradually, is that loss of independence. Certainly early on, it's more an annoyance, a frustration and whatnot, and it doesn't interfere with their ability to care for themselves significantly. But over time, this loss of memory will result in loss of independence. And then, of course, as it progresses, there's the loss of language. So the ability to communicate in the way they've always communicated is severely compromised. Now, we have loss of communication. I want to stress that doesn't mean that there is no ability to communicate as time goes on with memory loss. Communication changes. So it's loss of the old way of communication. Communication in terms of it being a way to connect with people, that still is there. But effectively for the person, when they're not able to do that back and forth, it can feel like they can't communicate anymore. Or if you are the care partner, it can feel that way. Along with all of this is often that loss of sense of self. You know, when you forget your history, it feels like, you know, your self to date didn't matter in a way. You've lost it. You've lost that history that makes up who we are. And we tend to define ourselves by our history, by our collection of memories. And certainly we are more than the sum of our memories, but it can be a very difficult challenge accepting that that is in fact the case, because, you know, all those pieces that lead up to who you are today, if you can't remember those pieces, it's very, very difficult. There's a growing sense of isolation, particularly when things are, when the memory loss is happening a lot, and so you feel very silly and you start pulling away from other people. You know, I don't want to go to my gym class anymore because I never remember the names of the people, and they tell me their name every week and I can't remember the names. So, you know, gradually the person stops attending because they feel so stupid. Growing sense of isolation as they start forgetting daily things. They start forgetting the people in their life, and that can be very, very petrifying, very scary, very isolating, because here are people who are close to you, who say they are close to you, and you can't remember who they are. In a way, you know, the challenge for the care partner, for the people around them, not just the care partner, family, friends then, is to try to keep that impatience at bay, because it's so easy to become impatient. You know, if this is a person that you've known for a long time, and that type of communication that relies so much on memory has never been an issue, when they're forgetting things, it's your best friend and you arrange to meet for lunch today at 2 o'clock, and you go to the restaurant and you wait and you wait and you wait and she doesn't show up. And you finally phone her and she says, well, what was I supposed to meet you today? It's very easy to get impatient. Oh, for goodness sake, Sylvia, write it in your calendar or something if you can't remember. Very easy to slide into that. And that, of course, just makes the person feel worse. So really, ultimately, every aspect of life begins to be affected when memory loss is happening. Important for all of us when we're dealing with someone with memory loss, or if in fact you are the person who is experiencing memory loss, to remember that it is physiological. It's not a matter of the person not paying attention. It's not a matter of them not caring. You know, if you only focused, you'd remember, that kind of thing. There are physiological changes happening in the brain. Brain cells are dying when we're dealing with one of the progressive dementias, Alzheimer's in particular. Brain cells are dying. And you can see, if you have the slides on your computer, if you're not just on the phone, the left-hand side of the screen, we have the healthy brain and cross-section of the healthy brain. If I use my little arrow, if I can. There we are. And you see how it's, you know, full. There are very few gaps in this brain, a little bit, but not a lot. And then you see on the other side, now this is advanced Alzheimer's, this isn't early, but still, the overall configuration of the brain, it has shrunk. And there are gaps within the brain. And if you think of our brains as being telecommunications networks in a way, power lines. Power lines are down. There's these huge gaps, and messages are not getting through. And so little wonder then that there's memory loss as a result of this, because there's just all this shrinkage and all these gaps happening. So memory loss truly is physiological. And in terms of the impatience that we often feel with people with dementia, to me this particular image is a way to, at least a bit, combat that impatience. Because if we can remember ourselves, if we have someone in our life who has dementia, if we can see this picture of the brain and the way it's being affected by dementia, then I think it gives us that extra little to be patient with the person, because they're not doing it on purpose. We would not be blaming the person who has asthma for puffing. We would not be blaming the person who has arthritis in their shoulder for going, ooh, you know, I can't lift that. You know, I've got this limited range of motion in my shoulder, so I just can't lift it. We would just go, oh, okay, I'll see if somebody else can help me lift it. We wouldn't blame them for it. And so if we can see this image in our mind of the brain, it becomes that much more difficult for us to in any way blame the person with dementia for the memory loss they're experiencing. So when we are dealing with someone with dementia, how can we offer help in a way that is palatable for the person? Well, first of all, allow them plenty of time to process the information. One of the things that happens with the memory loss in the person's brain is that it is a progressive loss of brain cells. So I'm going to use the camera here for those of you that have your computer. If my hand is a brain cell and my watch strap is one of those proteins that's wreaking havoc in the brain, and that's amyloid beta. Amyloid beta breaks up and it forms little pieces that clump together into sticky masses. So my other finger is a message that's trying to come through to get to this brain cell, and it runs up against this amyloid beta plaque. Can't get through because of this sticky mass. If that's happening, well, a couple of things happen. First of all, this message still has to go somewhere, so it has to find a detour. So that takes some time. Those of you that have been anywhere near the roads in the last few days, things take time. You know, you've got snowfall, you've got construction, you've got traffic tie-ups. It's a similar thing. You need to find detours, and it takes time. The other thing that happens when messages can't get through is ultimately this brain cell dies. And so the message goes to get through, but there's nothing to get through to there, and it has to find another brain cell. So the person needs time to process the information that we are asking of them or passing along to them. If the person seems stuck for a word, gently prompt them if that's something that you have cleared with them before. So saying to the person, you know, you could do it beforehand or you could do it at the time, saying, you know, if you are stuck for a word, do you mind if I throw one in just to see if it's the right word? Doing that ahead of time helps. Or at the time, if the person's, you know, they're trying to get a word out and jumping in and saying, is it okay if I, you know, am throwing in a word and seeing if it's the right one? So that they still have control over their communication, in the sense that they can, no, I'll find it myself, you know, that kind of thing. Or they may be very grateful to have you throw in the word and fill in the blanks for them, as long as you're not doing it so much that they can't get a word in. So the gentle prompts. Try to do things with them rather than for them. Most of us as adults aren't real keen on being done for all the time. You know, being done for is kind of what happens when we have special occasions. You know, it's Mother's Day, and so the family gives you breakfast in bed. You're being done for. And that's lovely. It's wonderful when it's not all the time. But if we're in a position where we can't do for ourselves and others are always having to do for us, it's very demoralizing. It's very difficult for, well, probably any of us as adults. And so the more we can, as care partners, as friends of people with dementia, the more we can do things with them, as opposed to making it seem like, you know, just sit there, I'll do it for you, the easier it is on them. If you do offer help, try and be tactful about it. No, you just sit there, I know you're having a tough time, I'll do it. Well, excuse me, that's tough for anybody to hear. Would you like a hand? Can I help you out? Excuse me for 1 minute. Okay. Give the person plenty of encouragement. When you are feeling distressed with your difficulty, it does help when you've got a bit of a cheerleader. But I guess a tactful, going back to the word tactful, a tactful cheerleader. One of the things that is very easy to do, and it doesn't feel really good, is to encourage someone by normalizing their memory loss. So when they're going, oh, this is so frustrating, I can't get the words just don't come. What we have a tendency to do often is to say, oh, don't worry about it, that happens to all of us. Well, you know what, it doesn't happen to all of us, not to that degree. And when we respond in that way, it really minimizes the person's difficulties, it minimizes the stress they feel, and it's ultimately not very respectful. It comes from a good place, we're wanting to make them feel better. Oh, don't worry about it, I forget people's names all the time. You don't forget people's names all the time. If you do, then perhaps you're in the same boat as the person that is in the early stages of dementia. But when we try to normalize it, we're ultimately not respecting the challenges that they're facing. So encouragement is more along the lines of, I know you're having a tough time, but don't rush. We'll get there. We always have a good conversation, no matter whether you remember everything or not. That's more encouraging. You're not minimizing the challenges they're facing, and you're being supportive of them. Don't quiz the person. There's also a tendency for a lot of us when the person's experiencing memory loss, kind of to think along the lines of, if my right arm is weak, what do I do to make it stronger? I exercise it, right? So, more reps. You do your barbells, and that'll strengthen my arm. Use it or lose it. So often there's that tendency, particularly in the early stages of the person's dementia, use it or lose it. So you're calling your dad and you're saying, so Dad, what did you do today? Oh, okay, where'd you go? Who was there? Oh, that's nice that you saw your old friends. Yeah, what'd you have for lunch? On and on, those kinds of questions, thinking, that'll stimulate him to remember. I'll just, keep those questions coming, and then that'll force his brain to work. That's probably true when we don't have dementia. Those kinds of things, can keep us a little more on the ball. Use it or lose it. That probably is useful advice when we don't have dementia. When the dementia has already taken hold, there's a very, very fine line between exercising the brain and frustrating the life out of the person. And often those questions can be very frustrating and very demoralizing. I can't remember. I should remember. It just happened today. And it's not helpful to the person. So watch the 20 questions kind of attitude. Be patient with repetition. And that's repetition that you are required to do because the person perhaps didn't understand, didn't connect with them initially, but repetition from them. Part of memory loss often results in the person asking the same thing over and over and over, or telling you the same story over and over and over. And when you've been asked for the 10th time in half an hour, what time are we going out for dinner tonight? It's very easy to snap. Oh, for goodness sakes, Bob. I told you, I don't know how many times, we're going out at 6 o'clock. Will you just sit down and do something? When, for us, it's the 10th time he's asked. For him, it's the first. He's asking because he does not remember that he's asked already. And so when you are the care partner or a close person to a person with dementia, certainly it is frustrating. And that's not to say that you won't get frustrated. And Sometimes we really have to kind of grab ourselves and, those deep breaths and just, reminder, okay, he's asking not because he's trying to drive me crazy. He's asking because he does not remember. Just that reminder to ourselves. If the person becomes distressed over a lost item, they forget where they put it. Certainly acknowledging how they feel. So they're, I forget, I put my ring away and I put it somewhere so it would be safe so I wouldn't lose it. I don't know where. So that frustration, so acknowledging that first. Not just jumping in, well, let's find it. Acknowledging how the person feels. Saying something like, oh, you must be so upset. I know how much you love that ring. How frustrating for you. Lucky there's the two of us here. Step 2, reassure. Lucky there's the two of us here. Let's see if we can find it. But starting out by acknowledging the feeling. Saying something like, oh, don't worry about it, we'll find it. Again, that's dismissing how they feel. So acknowledge those feelings. If the person seems to be searching over and over and over again for an item that either is non-existent or doesn't appear to exist because you've looked, again, acknowledge the feeling. Just because it's not real. So, for example, they may be very frustrated because they can't find their dog Fluffy. And Fluffy passed away 20 years ago. So you know absolutely that finding Fluffy is not going to happen. It simply won't. You also, in a misguided attempt to be helpful, already said to your friend, oh, Muriel, Fluffy died 20 years ago. Don't you remember? Well, probably not. That's why she's looking for Fluffy. So she probably doesn't remember, and that would probably be very upsetting for her. It's very easy, though, to not acknowledge how she feels when we know that it's not a real thing anymore. The situation isn't real. But the feelings still are. The feelings are always true, even when the facts around them are. So saying something like, oh my God, you can't find Fluffy? Oh, I know how much you love that dog. You must be just devastated right now. Reassuring them, it's okay. We'll work on it, you and I, okay? And then trying to distract or redirect the person. So saying something like, I'm pretty sure you've got a bunch of really good pictures of Fluffy in that photo album of yours, don't you? Can we go have a look? And then just looking at the photo album and going, oh my goodness, that is probably the prettiest little dog I've ever seen. Do you have some more? Oh, there you are. There's your daughter with Fluffy. Isn't that a beautiful picture? And so you've acknowledged how they feel, you've reassured them, and then you're distracting them in a way that kind of gradually pulls them away from the initial concern. Encourage the person to continue to communicate verbally, even if they're having a tough time. As memory loss continues and the words become harder and harder to access, it can be very easy for the person to almost shut down from their end because they feel so frustrated that the words don't want to come, and also because of us, because in an attempt to be helpful, often we just jump in before the person even has really a chance to try. And this is something particularly in people that are very close, spouses, for example. So, for example, if the wife is the person with dementia and she's having a hard time saying something, her husband may jump in, being helpful. And, what she wanted to say is, blah, 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 blah. And then it happens again, and he jumps in. And it happens again, and he jumps in. Before you know it, if somebody's asking her a question, she's looking over to him to respond for her. And so effectively, we are shutting her down sooner than she needs to be shut down when that happens. And it's certainly understandable. We see the person struggling. We don't want to see them struggling. But reassuring them, take your time. There's no rush, that kind of thing. I'm here with you. If you find the word you need, that's great. If you don't, we'll have a cup of tea and we'll think about it later. So really encouraging them as much as possible, as long as possible, to continue to verbalize. Don't remind them they're forgetting. Don't you remember? We talked about this before. Nope. They don't remember. And that's the point that we have to remember. The Alzheimer's Society has little cards on our website that you can print up. They have various types of wording, but essentially it's please be patient, my partner has memory problems. We've got one here. Here's a different one. Please be patient and compassionate, my companion has Alzheimer's disease. This can be helpful depending on the situation when you're with a person in a public place. So for example, you are at the store and the person is struggling with the cashier. If you slip a little card to the cashier, or if you're going to the bank to discuss something to do with the bank account, letting the bank manager in so that they are aware and they can be a little bit slower and more patient than they would otherwise be. Sometimes this is difficult for people to do. It feels like you are going behind the person's back. If you can include the person in this and have that discussion with them, so much the better. We have these little cards, we'll just let them know so that, we can do it quietly so that everybody in the restaurant doesn't hear. We can just give it to the server in the restaurant so everybody doesn't hear, but then she'll be a little bit more patient with us. What do you say? That's the ideal. They can be helpful in certain situations. Now I have a little story here. It's not a true story. These are not real people, but they could be. The situation that they're in absolutely could be a real situation, and we'll just go through and look at what they're doing to deal with some of the memory loss issues and some of the challenges they face and how they, as much as possible, overcome them. So this is Jane and Edward. Jane was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 2 years ago. She lives at home with her husband, Edward. Jane and Edward's life together includes many routines in order to help Jane orient herself in time and space. Jane and Edward had a discussion on how Jane likes to be helped when she cannot remember words or things. So this, again, is the ideal. Have that talk. What would you like me to do? Their agreement is that Jane will ask for help when she wants it. Often this is done by just looking at Edward in an inquiring way, or by raising her finger while looking at Edward. So if she's having a tough time, kind of putting her finger up like this, or just checking with him so that he'll fill in the blanks for her. They've already discussed this ahead of time. Most of the time, people conversing with Jane and Edward don't even realize what's happening. So it's not like she's raising this red flag to everybody around, I'm having trouble, my husband's helping me out. They're doing it in such a way that it's very respectful of the challenges that she's experiencing. For example, last week Jane was telling a few friends about her granddaughter's artistic accomplishments. She was trying to tell her friends what her granddaughter painted, but was unable to recall. Jane said, "It was gorgeous and full of details. She painted this animal. What was it again? No, not a cow, like a horse, but smaller." At this point, she looked at Edward in that way that he recognized right away, and he said, "Yes, that's right, it was a dog." And so he's also saying it in a very respectful way. He's not saying, "Oh, Jane, it wasn't a horse, it was a dog." He's, yeah, that's right, it was a dog, because she said it looks like a horse, but smaller. Yeah. So he's being reassuring. So one of the things you'll notice from the first part of Jane and Edward's story is that they do rely a lot on routine. Routine is key. Routine is dementia's friend, basically. Try to establish consistent routines as early as possible in the disease process, because the earlier they're established, the more likely they will be an easy fallback position for the person. They won't have to learn something new when they're at a point when learning anything new is a challenge. Always store things in the same place. So if the keys go on the middle hook at the back door by where the boots are kept, always put the keys on the middle hook at the back door where the boots are kept, always. Popping them on the counter sometimes because, well, I'll be going out later anyway, that's that can be a challenge for the person with dementia. Always the same place. And ideally, always the same place they have been for quite some time. This is not a time in your life when major home renovations in terms of where things go and what things look like. It's not the best time. One of the things when we talked about home safety was that's important is decluttering. But as much as possible, keep things where they are, where they have been for as long as you've been in that space. If the keys have been there for the last 10 years, now is not the time to say, you know what, that's really not a very good spot. It would be much better if we put them in the front kitchen cupboard. Keep them where they've always been. If the sugar bowl is always kept on the table, you never put it away in the cupboard, don't start getting neat and saying, you know, it'd be a lot better if we kept this table clear. You know, let's put the sugar away in the cupboard and we can take it out when we need it. Leave it on the table. Try and keep things the same as much as possible. Give gentle reminders of date and time and what you're going to do next. So, you know, we can give reminders in a way that it doesn't look like, again, that red flag. We're announcing that I know you don't remember, so we can say something like, so today's Wednesday, what is it, February 7th or 8th? Oh, it's February 8th, is it? Yeah, okay. I guess we have that appointment at 2 o'clock. That's a gentle reminder. That's you know, not making a huge big deal of a reminder. Oops, did I get everything? Yeah. So going back to Jane and Edward, speaking of routine, they have a routine, and their morning routine is pretty scripted. They wake up around 9:30 each day, shower. Edward puts everything needed for breakfast on the kitchen counter. So he puts the bread, jam, and peanut butter next to the toaster, so it's where it needs to be for toast to be made. The coffee filter spoon are next to the coffee maker. And the cutlery, plates, cups, napkins, placemats, all that kind of stuff on the table, ready to be distributed. Now, you might ask why he doesn't just do all of that if he's putting all that stuff out. You know, trying to keep to old routines, and the old routine was that Jane always made the breakfast. And so encouraging Jane to do as much as she can as long as she can. If they just got up and Edward just went and had a shower and waited for Jane to get breakfast made, there might be a problem. But when everything's on the counter, Jane has her shower and she goes out and there's the toast fixings and there's the coffee fixings and everything's on the table ready to be set, she can go almost into autopilot and get breakfast ready. Independence for Jane, that sense that she still has control over her own life and what she's always done, helps her feel better. She feels useful, productive, a part of things. So she prepares breakfast, sets the table. After they've had their breakfast, they go for a 30-minute walk. This can be real helpful to clean out some of the cobwebs. I mean, it's good physically for any of us, but also in terms of cognitive functioning, that can be really helpful. Clean the dishes together, and then they sit down and either read magazines or the newspaper. So they've got this nice set routine to get their day going. Now, if instruction is needed, the more gentle it is, the better. First of all, model what you want the person to do. So if you would like the person to help you fold the laundry, fold the towel. Start folding the towels and saying, you know, there's a lot of towels here and I've got to go vacuum. Do you think you could finish this for me? So model what you want them to do. Use actions and body language to convey what you're saying. So folding that towel so they can see you folding it. They may not copy it perfectly. The towel may not be folded perfectly at the end of it, but that's okay. If you are doing something that requires several steps, break the instructions down into small, simple steps with space in between each one. You can have 20 small, simple steps. If they're all jammed together, it's still too much for the person. So doing it one step at a time. Allow the person to do as much as they can by themselves and focus on what they can do. So the towels, at the end of this, may be a little bit messily folded. They're not the way you would fold them. They maybe don't fit in the linen closet the same way, but they are folded. And so saying, thanks for the help. This makes my day easier. Good for the person. So I go back to Jane and Edward, and he's done this in terms of the coffee, making the coffee. He made an instruction sheet that he posted next to the coffee machine. Now, of course, this presupposes that she can still read. At some point, this may be a challenge, but right now she can still read it. All that's needed is to make coffee is on the counter next to the coffee machine. She doesn't have to go in the cupboard and fish for the filters or the coffee or anything else. Everything's there for her. And, we think of coffee as being a fairly simple process. Break it down into small steps, not so much. So he's been very careful to be really specific with these steps. Jane can still read. She can still follow along. This will not last very long. It's highly unlikely that all of these instructions would be able to be followed for very long. But early on, this is still possible. So flip open the top of the coffee maker. Fill the white coffee mug with cold water. Put that water into the top of the coffee maker. Put 2 more cups of cold water into the top of the coffee maker. Close the lid. Pull open the handle located at the front of the coffee maker where there's a red dot. Put 1 paper filter inside that compartment. Take a teaspoon of coffee from the red coffee jar. Put the teaspoon of coffee into the paper filter. Put another teaspoon of coffee into the paper filter in the coffee maker. Close the compartment door of the coffee maker. Turn on the switch at the bottom of the coffee maker. Coffee will be ready in about 10 minutes when the coffee maker starts beeping. So something as simple as throwing on a cup of coffee really isn't simple. That's 13 steps there. And he's broken them down very finely so that she can follow each one. He hasn't assumed that she knows any of these steps. And again, something like this will be a challenge in very short order if she's going to continue trying to make coffee. She won't be able to follow these instructions. Another thing that can help memory over the long haul as well is to get organized. I mentioned earlier in terms of safety, we talked about reducing clutter. But reducing clutter, keeping countertops and work surfaces organized, minimizes distraction for the person. So they are less likely to lose things, to forget where they put things, if there isn't much clutter to begin with. So being really brutal about getting things organized. Good idea to lock away valuables and important papers. They may go missing. And if the person really needs to have a copy for themselves, they really would feel better if they have a copy of these papers. Certainly, photocopying them, but keeping the originals somewhere safe. Have duplicates of essential items, such as eyeglasses, keys, toothbrushes. Hearing aids, well, they're really expensive, so having duplicates of those is probably not possible for most people, but that's another thing that can go missing on a regular basis. Attach keys or wallets to a belt so they're not easily misplaced. At some point, the wallet, the purse, the person may not be doing their own financial transactions, but it's still important for them to have their wallet with them, to have their purse with them. And so ensuring that they do, even if it's just a matter of having some change or a $5 bill or something. Often it's very, very important for people to have their money, but keeping the bulk of it somewhere safe or on your person if you're the care partner. Respect the person's reality. For example, if the person is insisting that it's 1942 and they're waiting for their mother to take them to school, it's really not helpful to say, oh, Sophie, your mom has been gone for years, and look in the mirror, you're 78. Person, if they're in that mindset, they may very well look in the mirror and go, who's that? Well, that's you, Sophie. Oh, don't lie to me. They're feeling it's 1942. Contradicting them does not help the situation at all. Again, focus on the underlying feeling instead of the details and the facts. So saying something like, oh, you and your mom have such a close relationship. get that old photo album out, show me the picture. You know, it's okay, the bus isn't here yet. And so sit down and look at some photos and share memories until the person has forgotten about the bus coming, respecting their reality. Memory loss means that they will forget what year they're in, not necessarily consistently. So if the person is insisting that it's 1942 today, it may not be 1942 tomorrow. It may be 1986. It may be 1940. And this is where it's so important really just to focus on how they're feeling about things and not focusing on the details, the facts around the feeling. Now, particularly in the earlier stages of dementia, memory aids can be really helpful. Labeling. So cupboards, drawers, water faucets, doors, you know, putting a note saying that this is the hot tap, this is the cold tap. Sometimes, you know, the red and blue, but the colors may not resonate with them in terms of red being hot over time. So putting the words, or putting the words with steam around the words and someone looking cold with the picture for the cold tap. At some point, the words will not be terribly useful, and then pictures will be more important. So, you know, even having the word and the picture just to start out with can make a big difference for the person navigating around their space. Use pillboxes. So particularly if the person is on their own, they're still in the early stages and they're on their own, use the pillboxes that have compartments for the days and the time of day. Use specialized pillboxes that only allow access to a particular compartment at the appropriate time, so they will buzz and unlock when it's time for the pills to be taken. Get the medications bubble packed by the pharmacy so that the person can, you know, get the 3 pills that they're supposed to take at noon. They're in the bubble pack and labeled as such. A lot of this, again, is very early on, but when memory loss is starting to be an issue, this can be important. They may have some medications where it's not crucial that they take them at a certain time. Some it might be. And certainly if they're on a medication for something, for a health-related issue, and they're not taking it, and they think they did, or they are taking it, but they're taking 3 days worth instead of 1, there can be some problems. Keep a daily calendar with the day's routine and any appointments. Again, the person at this point would still have to be able to read and follow along. Post reminders throughout the house to prompt the person in their daily routine. So, you know, in the bathroom, right by the toilet, flush the toilet. Above the sink, wash your hands. At the microwave, no tin dishes or no metal dishes. Things like that around the house while they're still able to follow along and read those signs. Encourage the person to carry and use a notebook or a small tape recorder. Now the tape recorder, not useful if the person has never used one. This is going to be one more frustration as they're sitting there going, what button am I supposed to push? They don't need that frustration if they've never used it. But if this is something that they have used in the past and it's understandable to them, it can be helpful early on. Take photographs to remember the usual placement of objects in a room. Take photographs in general in terms of memory. So if you take your mom out for a lovely excursion to a local park, you have a beautiful day, take photos. So the next day when she's not remembering the park, you can pull out the photos. You know, yeah, it was such a busy day, little wonder you don't remember. Look, fortunately I've got some pictures. Look at this, wasn't that a beautiful day? And you can sit and relive the joy of that day with those photos. And now, I mean, with people's phones and everything else, I mean, it's pretty simple to do that compared to in the past. Have the person carry an identification card in their pocket at all times that states their name, address, and emergency contact numbers in case they forget when they're out on their own and forget where to go. We also have the Safely Home, Medical Alert Safely Home bracelet that can help in this regard. And consider the use of tracking devices. We do have information on our website. There certainly are issues around the use of tracking devices, but if the person is starting to get lost, it might be something you want to at least look into. There are different kinds of tracking devices. There's a global positioning systems that use satellite signals to identify the person's location if they're wearing a transmitter, and they're fairly exact to within a few meters in terms of finding the person. There's different ones that operate on radio frequency, and they use radio signals, and they can be used indoors as well. They can pinpoint a person's location, but the range is usually not terribly large. Cell phone. If a person regularly carries a cell phone, they can activate a locating system on the phone, but it relies on the person carrying the phone and knowing how and when to use it. So that, again, might not be terribly useful after the early stages. And we do have a wandering package and a revamped wandering package on our website that you can check out. And if you don't have access to the internet, by all means, do call the Alzheimer's Society, and I'll have a number for the Dementia Helpline that you can contact to get this information to be sent out to you. Back to Edward and Jane. Edward is using several types of memory aids throughout the house to help Jane remain independent. He put a big weekly calendar in the fridge. He writes special events and appointments on it, but he also includes some of Jane's chores. For example, Monday afternoon, noon is lunchtime, 1 p.m. walk, 2 p.m. nap, 3 p.m. gardening, 4 p.m. TV, 5 p.m. dinner. And this helps orient her throughout the day if she's forgetting kind of the where and when. Excuse me for a second. Jane looks at this calendar a few times a day to orient herself or to remember appointments. Edward labeled the kitchen and bathroom drawers and cupboards to make it easier to find things. Some of the signs are written words, while others are pictograms. Jane can still read, but she finds the pictograms faster to identify. At this stage of her illness, Jane does not need signs on doors to identify the rooms in the house. However, Edward put a few signs in the kitchen and in the washroom as a reminder for Jane. For example, wash hands after using the toilet, turn stove off after use, do not put metal in microwave. Edward put a tray on the small table by the door for Jane's keys and cell phone. There's a sign on the table that says keys and cell phone. So in addition to helping Jane find what she's looking for, he's also helping her develop the habit of putting her things in the same place all the time. In order to make things easier to find and identify, Edward removed a lot of the clutter in the house and got rid of things that they no longer use, such as baking supplies. Jane and Edward made duplicates of their house keys so there will be no need to panic if they lose one set. Jane also bought a second pair of glasses in case she loses the first one. Jane uses an electronic pill dispenser, so she remembers to take her pills every day. And this way she's remembering sort of on her own. She doesn't have to have her husband be the one who's, okay, sweetie, it's time to take your pills. She's doing it on her own. So just brief recap, and then we'll open it up for comments or questions. When you're trying to help a person with memory loss, a few things that you can do. One is, first of all, help them retain their independence. Work with the memory that they have left. Work with their remaining memory. Help them maintain their sense of self. Help them maintain their language by allowing them to use it and not jumping in all the time. Reassure them when they're stressed and upset about it. Respect their reality. Offer help only when it's needed. Do things with rather than for the person. Reduce clutter in the living space. Use gentle instruction. Routine is key. Be patient, which is always easier said than done. Think of using memory aids, such as labeling, using pill boxes or bubble packs, a calendar of the daily routine, posting reminders in the house, identification cards. And remember, the problem is physiological. The person may be and probably is distressed by their memory loss. Everything seems new as time goes on. There may be a loss of identity as a result of this. Every aspect of their life is affected. Try to get through an hour of your day without relying on your memory. Unless you're just lying on the couch not doing anything,